The Intro.1 standard covers the characteristics of life as well as a process called homeostasis, which helps us maintain life. Because this is your first instructional video, I'm also going to be pausing periodically to tell you how to set up things in your notes. And so for the beginning of a brand new lecture, I would put this title at the top, Intro.1 Characteristics of Life and Homeostasis. I would always start a new standard on a fresh, clean page in your notebook so that if at some point you need to reassess that standard and just that standard, the notes are more concise. In each video lecture, I'm first going to highlight what is the standard that we're covering and then what are the vocab terms that tie into that standard. So here we have Intro.1, which says I can list and describe the major characteristics of life and the processes by which life is maintained, including homeostasis. I also put the section number from your textbook that this standard covers, just in case you want to refer to your online textbook and read up on any of the topics we're covering, or if something is unclear, you have a point of reference if I'm not immediately available to you. So this is section 1.4 to 1.5. In the terms list, I'm not going to read them to you, but at any point I encourage you to pause the video. I would not write these things down anywhere, this extended standard or the terms, just something to refer back to that is also included in your daily online agenda. All right, so big title for the top of your page underneath that Intro.1. It should say Unit 1, Introduction to Human A and P. A and P, of course, stands for Anatomy and Physiology. And then I have subheadings that I'd also like you to write. So Intro 1 covers a few different topics, and so first we're going to talk about those major characteristics of living things. If there's a term in blue, that means that's a term I definitely need you to know, and I highlight it in blue so that it stands out more in your notes. You're welcome to color code your notes however you find appropriate. Blue is just what I'm going to use. So anatomy is the study of structures or morphology of the human body and its parts. Essentially, when you're naming the bones of the body or naming the muscles of the body, that is anatomy. A lot of college courses split up anatomy and physiology into 2 semesters because you need to learn the names of everything before you kind of learn what they do. We will put them together in every single body system. So we'll learn the anatomy of the body system, like we'll learn the bones, and then we'll learn the physiology, how they come together, how they work together, what they do. So physiology then is how the body functions given those specific parts. And so ultimately what we're saying here is that the structure fits and determines the function. So everything that we study has been biologically engineered through the processes of natural selection and evolution to carry out their function as efficiently as possible. If this is going too fast, again, pause the video, copy down your definition, and then resume. All right, so for levels of organization, this is biological organization. The first few are things that you've covered in chemistry that you do not need to include in your notes. So subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, things that you counted in middle school and in chemistry. Those come together to form atoms, and we know them typically as specific elements, mostly in your body, hydrogen and carbon. Those come together to form larger molecules like water and sugar. And then ultimately that comes together to form things like DNA and proteins. Those will come together to form organelles, and then we get to the part of the human body that we are going to write in our notes, which is cells. So cells are the singular basic unit of structure and function. So if you look inside of a muscle, the smallest you can get where it still has properties of a muscle is the cell. So there's muscle cells, nerve cells, blood cells, and they're very unique. When you have a mass of those cells fitting together, they share a specific function, and we call that a tissue. Adipose tissue, for example, is fat tissue, and you have individual fat cells that come together to form clumps of adipose. Those tissues oftentimes organize themselves into an organ so that they can carry out a function effectively. So you have heart, kidney, stomach, liver, gallbladder, brain, any of those things are made of the same type of tissue. Oftentimes an organ system is made of several organs grouped together because they have the same task. So your digestive system not only has a stomach, but it has small intestine, large intestine, liver, pancreas, all of these things kind of working together, eventually making up the organism, composed of all these organ systems interacting together. So here's another picture of what that looks like. Atoms, molecules, macromolecules, organelles, and then we started writing at cells. So this is a very specific digestive cell, and we'll figure out how to determine that as we move through the course, but that forms digestive tissue, which forms the stomach, which comes together to have the entire digestive system, which is just one of your 10 to 12 body systems that make up the human body. Okay, so in biology, you learned a specific set of characteristics of life. And the ones that we're going to cover are roughly the same. Every textbook kind of defines them differently, but I've grouped them into two sets. And so this first set is going to be anything that has to do with energy. So respiration, we could think of it as breathing, but ultimately even your cells respirate because they're obtaining oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide, ultimately to release energy. Digestion, all living things are physically and chemically breaking down food. Absorption, once we've broken those things down, we have to pull it into our blood and into our lymph. We have to absorb it, those little tiny pieces, and shuttle them to other parts of our body. We only take in food in our digestive system, but our entire body, all of those cells need those micronutrients and those macromolecules, so we absorb those substances into our fluids to move it around. Circulation, like I just mentioned, the movement of those substances. Assimilation. So once we have moved proteins, moved fats, moved sugars to where they are needed in the body, we then take those chemical substances and we use them to build our own body structures. Your body replaces almost all of its cells on about a 7-year cycle. And so when people say you are what you eat, that is very literal. You are constantly taking the building blocks of your food and reforming them into the building blocks of your own body. And that rebuilding part is assimilation. We can't use everything though, so there's a lot of wastes that we have to remove, whether it's dead tissue that we've successfully used, or it's things we've taken into our bodies that are highly fibrous and we can't really break them down, but all living things excrete them. Collectively, these 6 characteristics are known as metabolism. So the chemical reactions that support your life. We have heard of people having fast metabolisms, which tend to be thinner, more athletic people, or slow metabolisms. Ultimately, it's just how effective is your body at carrying out those 6 things listed above. The other 4 characteristics of life are not dealing with energy, but are still just as important. Movement doesn't mean walking. It can, but ultimately it means movement in some part of the organism. So plants don't move, at least not fast enough for us to see them, but there is a lot of movement going on inside the cells of a plant. And so within our own body, we're experiencing tons of cellular movement. Responsiveness. Do we respond to external stimuli? So a plant, of course, will tilt towards the sun, reacting to that stimulus of light. Growth, we notice all living things at some point increase in body size or in cell number, and they reproduce, whether they're reproducing other members of their species or just reproducing their own cells. All living things are reproducing. Okay, and then the other half of the standard is a process called homeostasis. So homeostasis is how we maintain our stable internal environment. We are warm-blooded creatures, and our average body temperature is about 37 degrees Celsius, or 98.6 Fahrenheit. And our body, even if we're standing outside and it's 50 degrees, or we're standing outside and it's 105 degrees, has to maintain that 98.6. And we do that through a series of homeostatic mechanisms. There are 3 main parts to any homeostatic mechanism. A receptor to detect when something is off, a control center to make a decision about how to get back to our set point. Set point being what is our body happy at, what temperature, what pH level, what concentration of different molecules, any of those could be a set point. And then the effector fixes it. Oftentimes it's a muscle or a gland that the control center, usually your brain, tells what to do. So in our temperature example, let's say the stimulus was our body got too cold. There are thermoreceptors in your skin and in other parts of your body that tell the brain, hey, we're cold. The brain, particularly a piece called the hypothalamus, senses that we've dropped below our 98.6, and usually it senses it less than a degree after that has changed. It doesn't want our body to get to 90 degrees before we do something about it. And then it says, okay, I've got a plan. I'm going to tell the blood vessels to shrink a little bit and preserve their heat, and then I'm going to tell the muscles to shake, essentially shivering. Both of those things create a response that produce body heat and get you back to your set point of 98.6. It can happen for cold temperatures, it can happen for warm temperatures, in which case the only difference really is that the effector might tell your sweat glands to secrete some water, some liquid sweat, and that would evaporate and cause you to cool down a little bit, get back to your 98.6. There are two kinds of homeostasis, and the first is called negative feedback, which sounds like a bad thing, but it's really common. It's called negative because the response moves the variable in the opposite direction of the deviation from the set point. And what that means is, if there's a problem, I'm going to use my little pen here, if there's a problem and you're at your set point and all of a sudden you've deviated from the set point, in negative feedback, the response is going to move in the opposite direction. That's the only thing that makes it negative, is that it is opposite of the stimulus. So if we call this the stimulus, we call this the response, they move like that. Examples would be body temperature. So when your body gets too hot, the response is to cool it down. Also blood pressure or blood glucose level. If you get too much blood sugar, your body will try to lower it. Negative feedback. Positive seems a little counterintuitive then. Why, if we have this deviation, if we have this stimulus, why would the response ever be to exaggerate it? Because that is what is going on here in positive feedback. And the examples are things like blood clotting or childbirth. If a woman has a contraction, and that is the stimulus, we wouldn't want her cervix to close back up. That baby has to get out. So a small contraction triggers a larger contraction, which triggers more frequent contractions, eventually opening up the cervix until it is wide enough to deliver the baby. And so that's a situation where we wouldn't want to go backwards. Same with blood clotting. If we have a little bit of blood starting to clot at an open wound, we want to continue that blood clotting until it is closed up. So positive feedback. You also have case studies, one per unit, and I will include them in one video per unit. And so your first case study is about Sophia the robot, and she is the first robot who has been granted citizenship of a major nation. She was a citizen in Saudi Arabia, and you're going to be looking at how she fits and qualifies those 10 characteristics of a living thing. Ultimately, you are going to review the material and make a decision and an assessment on if she can be considered living, why or why not. Thank you.